All right, everyone. So we're going to get started here at the top of the hour. Welcome to today's Sunday sermon on online events. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. And here comes Zelda right on time. Those of you who are waiting for her, she's probably about to make her appearance here. Look for the tail. Um, okay. As we get started here, I just want to kind of offer a little bit of a full disclosure about my experience with online events. Most of the online events I've done during my career have been of the paid variety. So online teaching, webinars, things like that. And I've also done, Facebook Live Q&As. I've done a lot of YouTube Live with hosts, with other organizations, most of which have never been haven't been paid. It's open to all. So when I'm talking about online events today, I'm first going to discuss free types of events, especially the sorts of events that have become so prevalent during stay-at-home orders, and as we're all just spending much more time um, not in public and having to do book marketing and promotion virtually. That's one of the reasons I wanted to do this session, is to talk about the different styles of events that are happening, the pros and cons of these different styles. And then once we talk about some of the free types of events that are happening, we'll kind of segue into the types of events that you might be charging for, especially large scale events like conferences, even industry trade shows, which I've actually attended no fewer than 3 trade shows virtually at this point since stay-at-home orders started. And it's pretty fascinating. I mean, a lot of it feels like a whole new world territory. A lot of these things are untested, untried. No one really knows what to expect, if they're going to make money, if they're sustainable. There are lots and lots and lots of questions. So I don't pretend to have the answers to those, but I will tell you what I have seen, what I'm observing, share my opinions such as they are, and I look forward to your questions as we go. Okay, so why do online events in the first place, assuming that they're at least the free ones, why do them? And one of the key reasons is for the same reason you would, be on social media, or that you would do an in real life event, is that you want to build community, you want to develop audience, develop your readership in the case of being an author. Of course, right now in particular, we're seeing so many online events related to book launches and doing book publicity, because it's very hard to do those right now in bookstores or libraries, where there are social distancing guidelines. It's really hard to get more than 10 people in a room. And of course, people are nervous and anxious about going out to events. And so you can get better turnout often by having the event virtually. So there are some cases too where you can make money off of these events, which we'll talk about. But first, as I said, I want to cover the free options. Okay. So by far the most popular live online event is the Solo Talking Head, which we're in a bit of a meta situation here, because that's a little bit of what we're doing, the Solo Talking Head right now, although it's the Solo Talking Head next to the slide. So these sorts of events are best when you're engaging with people who probably already know you and follow you, like there's already some sort of relationship established. And you're offering perhaps some inside access, some behind the scenes. It can also be like expertise sharing, a learning opportunity, as we're doing right now, but it's often very informal. And the pros of this sort of event are that it's super easy to conduct, like you can do it just with your phone. The stakes are pretty minimal in most cases, especially if you're not charging. And you're probably already on the platforms that are conducive to this style of online event. So Instagram Live, Facebook Live are 2 of the most popular ways to do this. Now, the drawback is that these types of events can be least engaging, because you have to be really entertaining as a talking head to keep people's attention. And of course, if people are scrolling through their feed, you're competing against a lot of other things that are happening. If you don't have any subtitles on the video, and people often have the volume turned off when they're, browsing their phone, especially in public places. So they might not want to turn on the audio, and so they have no idea what you're talking about. So that's when visuals can play a really important role in grabbing someone's attention in these solo talking head videos. Like, it's nice to have some action. It's nice to have some animals, although Zelda's not cooperating. She's grooming herself over off camera. That's too bad. Um, or maybe if you're in an interesting place, if you're doing some walking and talking, sometimes that can provide some visual interest rather than just your talking head. But in any event, it's very, as I said, very easy to do. But unless you are very comfortable in front of the camera and have a really kind of pointed purpose in being on camera, it can sometimes feel a little aimless until you get some practice at it. Okay, so the next type I referenced earlier, which is when you go solo, but has a little bit more of a mission behind it, as this session does. It's a little bit more about expertise sharing. And I see this combined often with a book launch very effectively. So a really recent example that Mark drew my attention to was a guy who has his own YouTube channel, Rick Beato. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right because I'm ignorant of the music industry. But in any event, he spent a long portion of his career writing songs and music. And he now is he teaches about the business, he dissects songs, and he does all this on YouTube, and he gets some donations for it as well, as you can kind of see here in the screen capture I have. So, he's got a lot of subscribers on his YouTube channel. He's got like 1.5 million. And so when he goes live, he has a really active audience who's tuning in. But I want you to notice on this particular video that I have screen captured, which is called "Did I Help Ruin Rock Music?" This is actually a video that's being done in conjunction with his book release. So he has a new edition of his book coming out about the industry. Notice that he has a coupon code on the screen, which will allow people to take advantage of a discount on the book through his own site. And then he's also getting the donations, as you can see on the chat to the right. So, these sorts of videos work well if you've already got an established following, people who already kind of know what you do and are, avidly awaiting your next product or service or entertaining video or next expertise session. So I don't use YouTube. I think probably many of you know that. I do post videos there, but I don't go live there. So I don't have personal experience with this, but definitely there are some industries like music where this is a very popular place to be. All right, so the other, this isn't necessarily a solo talking head, although it could be, is the launch reading. So this is where you have your book coming out and you want to do something that's a little bit in the traditional vein of having a reading or having a book signing, but you're going to do it virtually. And these go much better, in my opinion, if you can do them with someone else. So for instance, Copper Canyon Press started these launch parties where they group together several authors to do readings. You get better turnout that way, and it just doesn't, there's not as much pressure on you, and it feels much more celebratory to have several people together participating as speakers or authors. So the purpose of these readings is, of course, to entertain with the reading and to engage people who are fans of the genre or the category that you're working in or the publisher you're affiliated with or the store you're affiliated with. And they're fairly straightforward to adapt from in real life events. Now, the drawback is that everybody is doing book readings now, or read-alongs, especially in the children's market. And celebrities are doing read-alongs. Michelle Obama was doing read-alongs with PBS virtually. So, there's so much of this activity, it can be hard to stand out, which just really furthers my point that you want to get some other people there with you to do a reading. I would really err on the side of keeping these short. I wouldn't do it as, like, if you plan to do a 30-minute reading and signing at a store, I would probably draw it way back for a virtual reading. Like, each person might only have 5 to 10 minutes at most. I think it's really helpful to break these things up into 5-minute segments because of attention spans. When we're looking at our screens, there's so many other things that we can do or be distracted by. So you want to make sure that you don't get into reading really long passages where people may just tune out. There is one particular tool that can be useful for this type of event, Crowdcast, because disclosure, it's Crowdcast I have not used myself. This is something I've heard from authors that they enjoy using this because it makes it easier to sell books. Really, I think what it does is it makes it much easier to have a call to action during the event. So unlike Zoom, which I'm using right now, I use Zoom for these events, I can't really add automatically a call to action where I give you a big button that says, hey, buy my book in support of this session. But with Crowdcast, it's much more possible to have that sort of call to action. And so I've seen it as a favorable tool if you are doing a book launch sort of event so that you can more easily sell books. I think another alternative, especially for book launches, to the reading, which, readings sometimes they're just not the most engaging way to go about a book launch event virtually, is to instead have a Q&A or a conversation with another author. So, for example, in my own community coming up in July, there's going to be a book launch event with Sharon Harrigan, whose new novel Half has just released. It came out last week. She's going to be in conversation with another author in the community. This was planned to be an in-store event, which the bookstore has now moved virtually. And so these two authors will discuss, how Sharon came to write the book and other questions raised by the novel. So the pros to this are that it can just be more interesting right from the start when it's a Q&A or conversation, especially if you give that conversation a title or a theme or an angle or a position that's of interest to people. And you can get more turnout too, because you've got the two people drawing their own fans rather than just the one person, especially for Sharon, who's a debut novelist. It's very helpful for her to be in conversation with someone else because as a novelist, she may not yet have an established fan base, although she does have a memoir out. So especially if you're a debut, it really helps to be paired with someone that people already know. The celebrity factor helps. But again, the cons here are some of the same as what I mentioned before. These have become more common and it can be hard to stand out. I think the way that you help set yourself apart is by the unique combination of author voices, by having a really distinctive theme or angle or position on it so that it's not just a Q&A with or a conversation with, but you're discussing a very particular thing. So focus on timely issues when possible, try to be focused and you'll get more turnout. Something that I have been really just delighted by over the last few months is the number of organizations that are doing what I would consider like more community forum events in virtual settings. For example, the IBPA, which is the Independent Book Publishers Association, has started doing roundtables during the COVID crisis to help its members talk about what they're learning, what they're doing, and to share resources and information about how they're handling the current lockdown. So, the purpose of these is that information sharing. You tend to have really high engagement in these types of events because you all have this thing in common. You have usually you have this challenge you're trying to meet or this goal you're trying to meet. So this sort of event would be ideal for organizations, for writers groups, writers organizations, anything that involves a membership. I would definitely be looking at a community forum. The drawbacks to this is that if you want to have a really good forum, you have to have someone to moderate or host. It can't just be a free for all where you all turn up at the same time. You have to apply some structure to it. So whoever is responsible for hosting or moderating, you'll want to have an agenda set out. The agenda should be sent out in advance. And then it's even better if the person who's moderating and taking the whole group through the agenda, even better if you have a second person that's actively looking at the chat, bringing in questions, and just helping have a much smoother experience. If you have a really small group of, like, let's say less than 10, you might not need to have 2 people. But with the IBPA's community forums in particular, I think they regularly have close to 100 or more than 100 people turning out. So in those sorts of situations, it's really helpful to have a couple hands on deck to help facilitate those conversations. The next thing that I've also noticed, which has been helpful to me in my business, is that more organizations, whether it's the IBPA or the Book Industry Study Group or writers organizations, they've been running more educational sessions, just one-off sessions. They're basically like webinars, but they're not one-person sessions usually. They're panels or they're roundtables. So they're bringing together some experts to talk about a specific question or issue. And so the purpose here is to showcase that expertise to address problem areas or sectors of the industry where, especially right now, where there might be trouble and you need to find some solutions. They're almost always educational in nature, or they're offering some sort of insight. And so the pros to this is that when you have a bunch of experts together on a single topic, this really can stand out. It has high value. It can attract really good turnout. As far as authors, if you had a group of nonfiction authors coming together on a single topic, it would apply to author groups. But these sorts of events usually benefit more the membership organizations. So the cons are similar to the community panel or forum that I mentioned earlier. So you have to have a good moderator who's willing to put in some of that upfront work to have a smoother experience at the time the event goes live. And furthermore, depending on who you're inviting to speak and the time it takes them to prepare, you might need to offer an honorarium as you would at an actual in real life event. Standards vary so much, and some people might consider it, like if they work at a major corporation or something, they might consider it part of their job to do this sort of activity. But especially with authors who are experts, you have to be, considerate that their time and expertise is worth something. And if you're bringing them together, then they might ask for payment, and you might need to come up with payment. When you organize these types of events, it's really a best practice to let the panelists know what questions are going to be asked, or at least provide kind of a rough breakdown of the topics covered, especially who you're going to go to first to answer a question, so they're not caught off guard, so that they can be prepared with something thoughtful to say. But obviously these panels and roundtables also need to have time for Q&A. So usually you can safely leave, 20, if it's an hour-long session, you can leave 20 minutes for Q&A, sometimes longer, depending. So now I should have actually put this one a little bit earlier because it's more related to book launches. But this is kind of a catch-all, the social media party, because I've seen actually membership organizations, writers organizations, and authors alike all host social media parties, happy hours, things to help just bring people together who might otherwise not be getting social engagement and interaction with because we're all stuck at home. But in particular, though, I'm thinking about the social media party as ways that support book launches. I see them used in particular by romance authors, by people in the self-publishing community, where you're doing a really big lead up to the day of the launch and then having a big party that evening. Shayla Raquel is someone in the independent publishing community who's done this a lot. And in fact, I interviewed her for a piece I wrote on these types of events for my newsletter, The Hot Sheet. And she had just a lot of good granular tactics to share about things like giveaways and what to do in the planning stages. And there's a lot of work involved to have a valuable social media party where people are actually excited and they show up. So if it sounds fun, I think it is fun, but it does require a lot of effort up front to get the people to turn out. And you also need to have a pretty fast pace. So, you might, again, when I talked about the readings, I mentioned how you might split things out into 5-minute increments. And it's the same sort of thing here. You don't want to have long periods of time where you're probably just doing one thing. It's also nice to have a buddy who's going to help you, especially if you're doing a Facebook Live component, so that they can help moderate questions or they can help be in conversation with you. I know some authors who've actually done the book sales during the launch party, or they've had advance sales of the book. And so every few minutes, they sign a book on camera and they ring a bell and they say, "Thank you, John Doe, for buying a copy. This will be shipped out to you tomorrow." So you want to have that element of celebration in it, whether it's the ringing of the bell, the signing of the books, having lights or party decorations or something to help liven the atmosphere rather than just being the talking head. My final tip on this is if you can, this would apply to any sort of book launch party. Partner with bookstores, your local bookstores, partner with libraries, or partner with other authors. And it's just for the same reason as you would partner with someone in an in real life event, is so that you can benefit from the joint marketing and spreading the word further than you might just on your own. And of course, if you're partnered with a bookstore on a launch party, they can help facilitate the sales through their website or through whatever channels that they like to use. And that takes a little bit of the burden off of you. Okay, so now we're going to segue into some of the paid sorts of events that you might run online, and the complexity greatly amps up once you're taking people's money. Then you run into speakers who want to be paid, and there are all sorts of logistics that come into play with paid events, especially if they're set over several days. And I know there are many writing conferences right now who've had to consider canceling or postponing or moving online, and they're looking at what their options are for these virtual events. Let me get a drink of water before I get into the next part, because it gets intense. So the trends that I'm seeing right now with virtual conferences, especially conferences that originally were supposed to go over 3 days, let's say, or even 2 days. And your average conference runs from like 9 in the morning, God forbid 8 in the morning, to 5 in the afternoon. And there are often evening activities or dinners. It's a long day, but you also have the energy of the people around you, and you're there for a very specific reason. And it doesn't feel overwhelming necessarily to sit through multiple sessions back to back. But if you're trying to do that at home, sit through these sessions back to back, it just doesn't work. At least I don't think it works that well. You can't expect people to sit at their desk for 6 to 7 sessions back to back as they would at an event venue. So you have to think about this a little differently, and finally getting to my point. The two things that I've seen conferences do is that if they want to retain some of that same kind of program that they had already established, then they will break it up and present it over a series of, say, 2 to 3 weeks. So they'll have 1 or 2 events per day, and so they'll parcel out their whole program over a much longer period of time, and then sell tickets for people to attend all of those or to get all of the recordings. So I've seen that sort of model. I've also seen, if that's not feasible or practical, I've also seen conferences do it in such a way where there'll be a session at 9, and then a 1-hour session at 9, a 1-hour session at 11, a 1-hour session at 1. So you give people at least, say, an hour break in between sessions, rather than expecting them to sit back to back. Or there might be 1 or 2 sessions in the morning and then 1 or 2 sessions in the afternoon. So the breaks are really, really important for these types of events. If you're considering a virtual conference or summit and you're not going to have concurrent sessions, meaning you're not going to be running things against each other, then you can look at the same tools as you would for webinars. So that would be things like Zoom or Crowdcast, GoToWebinar. All of these are pretty well known for doing exactly what I'm doing right now. And then you would have someone hosting there in the session with the speaker to help handle any technical issues. There's no drawback with the approaches that I've just described for a virtual conference, but they are limited in some ways. Like they don't necessarily give you that conference feeling. Like there's not necessarily the sense of networking involved or casual conversations in the hallway. And, this is a problem that hasn't really been solved yet, but there are lots of people trying to solve it, trying to come up with creative ways to make you feel like you're at an engaging event and not just sitting alone at your desk. So there are other types of what I would consider like really heavy duty platforms and softwares that not only try to help with that engagement and that feeling you're in a community event, but they also allow for concurrent sessions to be running at the same time. So the one platform I know of that supports this is called On24. There are others, but this is the one that I have seen used most often, like the trade shows that I've attended so far, like the SLJ Day of Dialogue that was hosted on the platform On24. And what happens is that when you enter the conference, you kind of come into this virtual conference hall, and there are lots of different places that you can go. There's the sessions, there's the lounge where other people are hanging out. You can see all the sponsors. You can go to the exhibitor booths where the exhibitors are actually, virtually attending and waiting for you to chat with them. So, to the extent this works, I can't tell you because I'm mainly just there to look at the sessions. Although I have had a couple networking moments where people have reached out to me because they saw I was registered for the event or they saw me attending a session, and then they emailed me to follow up because I don't know, they were curious or they wanted to see if I would come to their session that they were speaking at the next day. So I think like this is certainly, it's interesting for anyone, especially who has advertisers or sponsors or people or exhibitors, people who are really important to the event that they want to bring into the event as well, meaning it's not just about the education, but it's about the full community. Just be aware that if you're going to venture into this level of complexity, that these platforms are expensive. Like they won't even list the prices on the website. So I'm sure that it's the pricing is variable and they quote you based on lots of different factors, but I don't think it's not for the individual, I think. But it's definitely for organizations or established conferences that have that sponsorship revenue that they're hoping to retain. Okay, so that is the end of my official sermon, like all of the points that I wanted to touch on. And I know that I'm about we're at 3:30 right now. And so I'm just going to kind of hang around here to see where the questions or where the chat might take us. I see that one person has jumped into the chat to say that group readings help expose readers of one author to other authors' work. So it increases readership. And I couldn't agree more. I think it's really hard to go it alone, not just in real life events, but I think it's hard. It's even harder, I think, to go it alone in virtual events. It can feel quite lonely when you're the only one posting on social media about your social media party. It doesn't feel like a party when it's just you talking about it. So to the extent that you can find other authors or bookstores or libraries, it helps lighten the burden a little bit, and it creates more stakeholders and better turnout. Karen asks if I've had experience using different Zoom rooms for a small membership-based conference. I haven't used them myself, but I'm aware of the functionality. So for those who aren't familiar with Zoom Rooms, if you run a Zoom meeting, this wouldn't apply as far as I know to the webinar functionality. But if you run a Zoom meeting, you can actually have breakout rooms. So you can assign people to, like if you have a meeting of 15 or 20, you can put 3 or 5 into a breakout room, or divide everyone into 3 or 4 breakout rooms. And I think I've found this is really useful for writing related courses when you want people to do small critique group types of work, or you want to break your class up into small discussion groups and then you reconvene, or you have different tasks that you're assigning to the group and they're each going to come back in 10 or 15 minutes with, the results of their discussion. So I haven't used them myself, but I see that they have a really great utility for writing courses for those of you who facilitate those, and any sort of group that has to break into small groups regularly to accomplish something. So I hope that's helpful. There's also a whiteboard functionality for Zoom meetings that can come in handy for collaborative work if you're interested in the collaborative tools. Jessica asks, what's a reasonable stipend for an online conference or panelist speaker? It really depends so much on the event, what would be considered reasonable, and also what you're charging, if you're charging anything. So for example, if you're running let's say you're the Book Industry Study Group or the Independent Book Publishers Association, industry associations that are known to serve the community, they are nonprofits, which doesn't mean they shouldn't pay, but there's a really particular mission assigned to what they're trying to accomplish. So for those sorts of groups, they might pay a modest honorarium if they're not charging for the event. They might pay $100 or $200 or $300. This can vary by industry. Writing and publishing tends to be on the not so rich side of all businesses. So, Silicon Valley may pay more, I don't know, for that sort of thing. But in writing and publishing, the honorariums tend to be in the hundreds and not the thousands. Now, things get different if we're talking about an event that's being run definitely for profit, if it's, let's say, an entrepreneur or a business person of some kind, or it's, they're charging ticket prices, let's say that, especially if it's ticket prices in the hundreds of dollars, that's when speakers are going to start to say, all right, if you're collecting hundreds of dollars for each attendee, then I need to be paid what I might ordinarily be paid at a writing conference. Like if I'm going out to speak, I need to be paid something that might be commensurate with that level of effort. But there are no hard and fast rules. But I would encourage you, if you're hosting an event and you're reaching out to speakers, it's not great etiquette to assume they will speak for free. But if that is your assumption, I would make it plain up front and offer the reasons or justification for it to the extent that you can. Sometimes events are done for the benefit of charity. So if that's the case, definitely make that clear. Trying to think of some other scenarios that might come into play here that might affect payment. I'm not thinking of any, but if what I've said has raised even more questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A and I can keep addressing them. I would say the other issue is the sort of level of speaking that you're expecting of someone. So if you're expecting someone to just show up and answer questions, that's not as much of a burden as asking them to come with a 90-minute fully polished presentation that they would ordinarily earn money from. Or if you're asking them to deliver a keynote, or if they're the linchpin of the event, if they're going to be on all the publicity materials, when it's clear that you're using someone to help sell tickets, then you need to be prepared to pay them. Maddie asks, online events that include participants' video feel more engaging, but sometimes I think people aren't aware that they're on video. True. And it's distracting to watch them fidget or worse. Do you think it's appropriate for a moderator to remove a participant's video if they're being distracting? Um, I think what I would do is for any event where there are people going, well, where you know people are going to be on video or there's that chance, then I think you have to have it in kind of the meeting or event policy or guidelines, whatever information you send to people during or after registration. I think you need to make it clear that anyone that's disruptive to the event or anyone that's, I don't know how you would phrase it, but anyone who's posing a distraction, you're going to shut off their video. Whether that's appropriate is just going to depend on the event and sort of the culture or the community that you're in. But I don't think it's probably okay to just turn off people's video because you don't like their lighting or, that they're doing, like they just don't have the best, maybe office setup. So be kind and be judicious about how you do that, and just make the policy really super clear up front. The other thing I'll mention, because this can become an issue if you're hosting an event and having speakers come in, always try to do some sort of a tech check before that speaker goes live. So you want to get a sense of what their room setup looks like, what their lighting is like, what microphone they're going to use. You want to test those variables before you go live with your speaker. Or if you're the author hosting the event, you don't want your book launch event to be the first time you've ever used Zoom or the first time you've ever used Facebook Live, because it's going to just increase the anxiety factor. It's going to increase the chance that something will go wrong and you won't know how to deal with it. So obviously, the more experience you have with these tools, the more comfortable you'll feel and the better you're going to be at handling any hiccups that come into play. And again, I want to emphasize, because it's so important, if you're hosting an event, just don't assume that your speakers know what they're doing. And you should probably put together a page or two that steps them through what the tech is like and what sort of audio and video requirements exist, and then have that tech check if at all possible. And definitely if you're charging people to attend, you'll want to do that tech check with anyone who's going to be critical to the presentation. So I hope that helps. Diana asks, what's a typical stipend for a speaker at an in-person conference, and is travel included? So it's all over the map, Diana. There's no one answer to that. Certainly the smaller the conference, usually the less they pay. There's some conferences that are known for paying nothing. One of those conferences includes the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. At least for their panels, they pay nothing. They pay the keynotes, of course. But they expect that because you are a professor or a professional, this is part of your professional development, and your school's going to pay or someone's going to pay. And so they don't offer you anything, and they even charge you registration to be there. So, there are different norms in every single corner of writing and publishing. But certainly, as soon as we're dealing with a conference that is charging registration, usually the speakers deserve to be paid something unless they're local, and usually travel expenses, lodging expenses are covered if it's the conference inviting the speaker. The dynamic can change when it's the speaker petitioning the conference to have a session. So that puts the speaker at more of a disadvantage if they're trying to get through, if they're not the one who's been solicited. But if you're being solicited for the event, then you should be asking to be paid. But again, it's really hard to say that there's one single number that is being offered. When I first started speaking at conferences, I charged nothing because I was acting as an employee of Writer's Digest, and it was seen as a conflict of interest for me to accept money for that, because I was, benefiting my employer and I shouldn't be taking money. I don't know if I quite believe that it's a conflict of interest today, but that's how it was when I worked there. So it wasn't until I went full-time, when I left Writer's Digest, and then definitely when I went full-time freelance, that I started charging. And so over the years, I've increased those prices to come out to a conference, but not everyone can charge what I charge. But I would say it's very common to see, $300, $500. Once you get into keynote territory, it's in the low four figures, depending on the celebrity factor of the person speaking. So I hope that helps. Okay. Just checking the chat to see if there are any more outstanding questions. I see that Carol mentions that she attended an event over Zoom with breakout rooms and that it worked well, although it took some time, some planning to specify which room a person should go to. So that's very good advice. And yeah, I think that covers all of the questions and all of the chat at the moment. So we haven't gone for a full hour today, which we typically do, but I hope this has still been helpful. If despite the brevity, maybe it's better because of the brevity. And the next Sunday sermon is going to be next week. It's going to be about saving time and productivity, and I'm going to give you a really personal look at how I manage my workflow, the tools that I use. And I often discuss, these sorts of things, but I'm planning to pull back the curtain a little bit more than I usually do. And I hope that it's helpful. Certainly I have a lot of advantages. Like I don't have kids. I just have a very needy animal. And I don't have parents to take care of. So I have advantages that some other people do not. So I'm going to be talking about that as well, and how I've set up my days to take advantage of the time that I do have. So thank you all so much for coming today, and I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye, everyone.